Hello, everyone. Today, you arrive at the gates not of a palace nor a home, but of a place where people are sent to be forgotten. A place built of brick and theory, shadow and silence. The gates groan as they open. They're heavier than you expected, not just in weight, but in meaning. You're not entering this place. You're being swallowed by it. It's the late 1800s, the century of trains, telegrams, and theories about women. You've been told you're nervous, unwell, perhaps too emotional, too imaginative, too talkative, too quiet. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that someone, a husband, a brother, a father, or even a neighbor, decided your feelings were no longer acceptable, and the doctor agreed. Your shoes crunch on gravel. The sound is lonely. You're dressed modestly, though your gloves don't match. You left in a rush, or perhaps someone else packed for you. The chill seeps through your coat, and the wind carries with it a faint scent, something sharp, metallic, and medicinal, a smell you'll come to know intimately. Inside, the corridors are longer than they need to be, lit by high, narrow windows that filter in a grey sort of light. The walls are a greenish hue, perhaps meant to be calming, but in this light, it just looks sickly, like the colour of faded hope. A woman in uniform takes your name without looking at you. She doesn't smile. Her job, you will come to learn, is not to comfort, but to observe, to assess, to record. Her eyes flick across your face like she's searching for cracks. They ask if you've eaten. You say yes. They write, appetite normal. They ask if you sleep. You hesitate. They write, insomnia. You say you miss your sister. They write, obsessive. You're led to a room, not a cell exactly, but not quite a bedroom either. The mattress is thin, the blanket coarse. There's a crucifix on the wall, and a chair with only 3 legs. One window, barred. Later, a doctor visits. He smiles, but it's a professional smile. Polished, practiced, unfeeling. He smells of starch and camphor. He asks questions, not to understand, but to confirm. Do you feel sadness? Do you ever hear voices? Have you ever wished to strike someone? Your answers don't matter as much as your tone. If you answer too calmly, you are cold. Too emotionally, you are unstable. His notebook is a trap. Each line filled not with your truth, but his version of it. You are not here to heal. You are here to be managed. Outside, the leaves are turning, but you're not allowed outside today. They say it's for your safety. In truth, it's because you cried this morning, or perhaps because someone else cried, and they don't want a chain reaction. Emotions here are contagious and dangerous. The staff speak in codes. She's agitated means you asked a question. She's resistant means you didn't smile. She's relapsing means you remembered something painful. You begin to understand that silence is currency, stillness, a shield. You learn to speak only when spoken to, and even then, only in small, careful phrases. Yes, doctor. No, nurse. Thank you. You are not yourself here. You are the version of yourself they can tolerate. At night, the halls creak with footsteps. Someone is always awake. A cough. A sob. The sound of a bowl dropped on stone. The walls are thin. Privacy is an illusion. Intimacy, a memory. You think of home, though that word feels dangerous now. Who sent you here? Who decided you were broken? And why did no one fight for you? In the morning, they bring you a tonic. Bitter, chalky. It numbs your mouth. It's said to calm the nerves. What it actually does is quiet the rebellion inside your chest. You begin to float, slightly detached from your body. This too is seen as improvement. The other women here are ghosts of many types. One repeats the same prayer over and over, like a lullaby to a god who's forgotten her name. Another stares out the window, even though it faces a wall. She says she can see the sea. You nod and say nothing. Maybe she can. Some of them scream at night. Others haven't spoken in years. You're told you're lucky, you're high functioning. You keep your clothes tidy, your hair combed. You write. That's seen as a good sign, until it isn't. One day, your journal disappears. No one knows where it went. There are rules here, but they change depending on who's watching. One nurse may allow you an extra slice of bread. Another may punish you for asking. The rules are fluid, like your diagnosis. You're told you suffer from hysteria, a vague, bloated word. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It means you were inconvenient. It means your grief frightened them. Your anger embarrassed them. Your dreams were too loud. One day, a new patient arrives. Her hands shake. She smiles too often. They say she danced at her husband's funeral. That's why she's here. You wonder if she actually danced, or if someone saw her smile at the wrong moment. It doesn't take much. They shave her head. Not for medical reasons. It's punishment, or humiliation, or both. You dream of open fields, of light, of laughter, and then you wake up with a start because someone is screaming in the hallway again. The staff say it's progress when you stop reacting. One afternoon, you're taken to a small room for therapy. The doctor asks you to describe your feelings. You say you're tired. He writes, lethargic, depressive. You say you're frightened. He writes, paranoid tendencies. You say nothing. He writes, uncooperative. You realize there is no right answer. The walls begin to absorb you. Days blend. Meals blur. You forget things. Names. Months. Your own handwriting. One day you look in the mirror and do not recognize the eyes staring back. There are moments of softness. A fellow patient places a flower on your pillow. A nurse hums as she changes the linens. These moments are rare, but they are lifelines. Once, during cleaning, you find a scrap of newspaper, a headline about a suffragette protest. You read it quickly before it's taken away. The world is moving outside, but not for you. You begin to write stories in your head, of escape, of justice. You imagine walking out of these gates, not just as someone freed, but someone believed. But belief here is the rarest thing of all. In the evenings, they lock the doors early. The lights go out in slow sections, like falling dominoes. Your room darkens. You lie there, listening to your own breath. You wonder how many other women, over how many years, lay in this same position, wondering the same thing. And now, just breathe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time is it. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Dim the lights, let your eyes rest, and with a slow exhale, let yourself drift deeper into the quiet, into the memory, into the world we're about to explore together. It wasn't always called hysteria. Before the 19th century, the word belonged to shadows, to whispers, to ancient theories that tangled the female body with the moon, the tides, and wild, unspeakable fears. The Greeks called it the wandering womb, an organ believed to drift inside the body, causing madness, seizures, or silence, depending on its mood. A misplaced uterus, they thought, could turn a woman into something dangerous. Centuries passed, and the womb kept wandering, not in reality, but in the minds of physicians who feared what they couldn't control. By the 1800s, hysteria had been embalmed in textbooks, not as a superstition, but as a medical certainty. It was no longer a mystery. It was a diagnosis, and it belonged, almost exclusively, to women. You didn't need to be mad to be hysterical. You only needed to be excessive, too emotional, too melancholic, too creative, too sexual, or not sexual enough. The list was elastic, expanding to fit whatever society found uncomfortable in a woman. If you wept, you were weak. If you spoke out, you were unstable. If you questioned, you were sick. The doctors, mostly male, wore waistcoats and spoke with certainty. They believed they were rescuing you from yourself. They carried clipboards and confidence, diagnosing with the ease of someone who had never been doubted. They had formulas for sadness, charts for passion, and prescriptions for longing. You could be labeled hysterical for refusing marriage, for writing poetry, for grieving too long, for laughing at the wrong moment. Some women were confined for reading novels, others for masturbating, still others for simply aging in ways that disturbed their families. It wasn't madness. It was womanhood under surveillance. There were pamphlets and public lectures. Medical journals debated whether hysteria was seated in the nerves or the soul. Some called it a moral failing, others a nervous condition. Either way, the woman was the problem. And the solution? Confinement, compliance, and quiet. In Paris, Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot performed demonstrations with hysterical patients, mostly women, in crowded amphitheaters. He showed their contortions, their trances, their paralysis, like a traveling magician unveiling tricks. They were touched, probed, observed, not as people, but as spectacles, as living symptoms. Sigmund Freud, a young neurologist, watched these performances and began shaping his theories. He would later redefine hysteria as a conflict of unconscious desires. But in the moment, his patients were still women, still hurting, still misunderstood. They came to him with pain, with trauma, with voices buried deep, and he turned their suffering into case studies. You weren't crazy, but the world around you had little space for complexity. A man could rage, could mourn, could escape into drink or silence. A woman, though, a woman was expected to endure, to smile, to serve. And when she couldn't, when her grief outgrew the room, she became a diagnosis. There were types of hysteria, conveniently labelled: somatic, hysterical blindness, hysterical pregnancy, convulsions, mutism. A woman could lose her voice, her sight, her memory, and still be dismissed as dramatic. Her pain was a performance, her body unreliable, and yet the suffering was real. Many women experienced numbness, tremors, hallucinations. They fainted without reason. They couldn't eat. They heard voices. They forgot names. Today we might call it trauma. We might see the fingerprints of abuse, loss, postpartum depression, sexual violence, repression. But in the 19th century, it was folded neatly into one word: hysteria. Doctors believed the female body was inherently unstable. Her biology, her cycle, her womb, her ability to bear children, made her irrational. She was, by nature, a lesser version of man, a deviation, and therefore in need of control. You were not treated. You were tempered. There was no single path into the asylum. Some women were brought by force. Others arrived willingly, hoping for peace, for rest. Some came after childbirth, exhausted and bleeding. Others after heartbreak. Still others after an argument no one remembers. The admissions papers rarely told the whole story. Emotional instability, melancholia, unclean thoughts, uncontrollable grief. Sometimes just one word: hysteria. Behind each word was a life, a story, a storm trying to be still. And so, as you stand in the hallway, watching the world dim through barred windows, you start to see the patterns, not just in yourself, but in the system. You are not alone here, not in your pain, not in your sentence. What they called hysteria may have been a scream, long stifled, a need unmet, a body carrying too many memories, a soul bruised by silence. And perhaps, somewhere beneath it all, you begin to feel a question rise, not loud but steady. What if you were never sick? What if you were simply unheard? Your first morning begins not with light, but with the sound of keys, heavy, jangling, impatient. A nurse pushes open your door with the practiced motion of someone who's done this 1,000 times. No knock, no greeting. Just a tray and a warning. Eat quickly. Doctor's round soon. The room smells different in daylight. Less like fear, more like vinegar and soap. The walls, yellowed by time and moisture, seem to lean inward. You sit on the edge of the bed, tray in your lap. The food is grey, shapeless. Porridge, perhaps. Lukewarm. You eat it because it's easier than explaining why you wouldn't. Down the corridor, someone is humming, low, tuneless. Another voice calls out, then stops. A metal bucket clatters. Somewhere, a woman weeps. The hallway outside your door is lined with footprints. You don't know how long they've been there. Some seem too small, some too wide, all of them moving in one direction, away. You step into the corridor. It's a cathedral of quiet. Not silence. There's always noise, but the kind of quiet that weighs on your chest. Nurses shuffle past. No eye contact. One adjusts a chart. Another carries linens. They don't smile. Each door you pass is numbered. Behind each, a life paused. Some doors are open. Inside, women sit on edge-worn chairs, hands folded like secrets. One rocks slowly. Another stares at the wall, eyes unmoving. You pass a woman holding a handkerchief soaked in perfume, her only rebellion. The scent is sharp, floral, defiant. She holds it like a relic. A bell rings. Breakfast is over. In the common room, the air is thick with disinfectant and a faint undertone of sweat. The windows are tall but grimy, filtering the sun into a kind of defeated gold. The walls are lined with books no one's allowed to read. Dust has claimed the spines. A piano sits in the corner, locked. You wonder who last played it and what song it was. You're given a task, folding towels. You sit at a table with 3 other women. None of you speak. One folds quickly, robotically. Another keeps refolding the same towel, over and over. Her fingers tremble, but her face is blank. The 3rd woman looks at you and offers a small nod. You return it. That's enough. The doctor arrives after the first hour. He doesn't come alone. A group of medical students follows. Young men with notebooks and forced expressions of empathy. They glance at you, then look away. To them, you are a case, an opportunity to learn. Your name is not on their lips, only the word patient. He asks you questions in front of them. How are you sleeping? Do you still feel anxious? Any unusual thoughts? What counts as unusual? You say you slept well. A lie. You say you feel calm. Half a lie. You say you're fine. The biggest lie of all. He nods. The students write things down. You don't know what. Later, in the bathing room, the tiles are chipped and the water tepid. You are allowed 10 minutes. The nurse watches from the corner. Not for your safety, but for compliance. No singing, no lingering, no hiding anything under your gown. The soap is harsh. The towel, damp. There's no mirror. Cleanliness here is not for dignity. It's for order. Outside, a crow lands on the windowsill. It stares at you, tilts its head, then flies away. You watch it go, feeling a sharp ache. Not for freedom, exactly, but for something more subtle. Movement without purpose. Sound without consequence. Lunch is silent. Utensils scrape enamel bowls. A woman sneezes. Another whispers a prayer over her mashed vegetables. No one reacts. In the afternoon, you are assigned to embroidery. Your hands stitch mindlessly. The thread is coarse. The cloth, stiff. The pattern meaningless. You stab the needle in and out, your fingers remembering skills your mind can't focus on. You look around. Everyone is doing the same. Stitching. Waiting. One woman has sewn her own name, again and again, into the corner of her cloth. She doesn't speak, but her fingers shout. A nurse notices, takes the cloth, rips it. The woman doesn't flinch. Later, in your room, you lie on the bed, eyes open. The ceiling is cracked, the pattern resembling a river you once saw as a child. You try to follow it with your gaze, imagining it leading somewhere. Out. The smell in your room is part dust, part old books, part sadness. It clings to your clothes. A sound outside your window. A girl laughing. Real, young, bright. Someone walking past the walls that hold you. Just passing. You sit up instinctively, but she's already gone. Evening falls slowly here. The light dims as though unsure it wants to leave. One by one, the rooms darken. Someone sings, a lullaby with no words. Someone else moans. Soft, rhythmic, like breathing through grief. You do not cry, not because you aren't sad, but because even your tears feel watched. You think about smells, suddenly, how every corner of this place has its own scent. Disinfectant, linens, sweat, ink, must. You wonder if you'll stop noticing them one day, if they'll become part of you. A nurse brings the evening tonic. You hesitate. She watches. You drink. The bitterness coats your tongue. You swallow slowly. It's not poison, but it's not care either. Outside, the stars begin to appear. Just a few behind the grime, distant, indifferent. You lie back. The sheets are scratchy, the mattress unforgiving. But your body, too tired to resist, begins to surrender. In the quiet, you listen to yourself breathe. You survived another day. You are still here. The days settle into a rhythm that feels less like time and more like erosion. Every hour scrapes gently at the edges of your selfhood until even memory begins to feel optional. You wake. You eat. You sit. You walk. You lie down. The order may shift, but the emptiness between the actions does not. Today, like most days, begins in grey. The sky outside is the colour of dishwater. Rain clings lazily to the window panes, not falling, but hovering, suspended. Inside, the light is dull, as if the building itself resents illumination. You are assigned again to the laundry room. It's a long space with a ceiling that sweats. The air is thick with steam and the acrid tang of lye soap. Buckets clang. Water sloshes. Women work in silence, bent over basins, their sleeves soaked, their eyes downcast. The floor is always wet, always cold. You are handed linens, stained, stiff, heavy with someone else's sickness. You dip them into water so hot your fingers sting. You scrub, rhythmically, without thought. It's not the dirt they care about. It's the obedience, the ritual of cleansing, repeated daily, as if purity might somehow seep into you through your knuckles. Across the room, a woman murmurs to herself, not in madness, but in memory. You catch fragments, names, places, a lullaby. Her voice is soft, not meant to be heard, but here, silence amplifies everything. A nurse barks at her to hush. The murmuring stops. The water continues to swirl. By midday, your hands are raw. The skin at your wrists has split. Faint red lines like tiny cracks in porcelain. You hide them under your sleeves. Injuries here are suspicious. They imply defiance, even if accidental. Better not to draw attention. In the dining room, the food arrives late. A boiled root vegetable. Bread like plaster. Broth that tastes like absence. You eat anyway. Hunger isn't the problem. It's the ritual. Missing a meal is noticed. You sit at a table with 3 others. One has the eyes of someone who used to teach. Another twitches slightly with each sound. The third stares directly at you the entire meal, her gaze not hostile, but hollow. You don't speak. Conversation is discouraged. Words are power, and power here is rationed. After lunch, a group is chosen for recreation. It's not optional. You're led outside. The yard is enclosed by a high wall, its bricks moss-covered and sweating. No flowers, just packed dirt and a few benches nailed to the ground. The air smells of dampness and something older, the scent of places that rarely breathe. You sit. The others walk in slow circles, like clock hands with no destination. No one runs, no one plays. This isn't joy, it's ventilation. A bird lands near you. Black feathers, sharp beak. It pecks the ground, then looks up. You hold its gaze. In that moment, you remember the name of a park from your childhood. You remember grass, laughter, apples in your pocket. The memory aches more than any wound. Back inside, you're sent to quiet hour, a room with chairs, no books, no music, just sitting. One woman fidgets with her dress hem. Another presses her palms against her eyes, as if trying to shut out the world from within. You sit and sit. Time becomes thick, like honey left in the cold. You start to think in slow, sticky phrases, not thoughts, impressions, a feeling of weight behind your eyes, a pulse in your temple, the smell of your own skin. Someone coughs. It echoes too long. The nurse supervising nods off for a moment. You watch her chest rise and fall, jealous of the ease. You haven't truly slept in days, only drifted, only surfaced. When quiet hour ends, you're called for an individual session. The room is smaller than you remember. The doctor's chair is larger. You sit on the stool. The imbalance is not accidental. He begins with questions, all too familiar. How are you feeling today? Any dreams? Have you had improper thoughts? You answer with caution. Not lies, not exactly, but truths shaped into safe forms. You say you dreamed of a river, that you feel stable, that you are grateful for the structure here. He nods, writes. His pen scratches like an insect. Then he leans forward. Have you thought about your place in the world? He asks. His voice is soft, like a parent reading a bedtime story. You pause. He watches your silence. You say you suppose everyone has a place. He smiles. And yours, do you think, is here? It's a trick. You see it instantly. If you say yes, you accept your confinement. If you say no, you are in denial. So you do the only thing you can. You ask, what do you think? He doesn't answer. The session ends. Evening brings more of the same. A meal, a pill, a hymn played on a cracked gramophone. The sound warbles like an old memory, one that can't quite hold its shape. Your bed is cold tonight. You lie down fully clothed. The blanket itches. Your feet curl to find warmth. The room smells of starch and damp wool. Your thoughts wander, not to escape. Escape feels abstract now, but to make sense of the shapes around you. You think of the other women, of their patterns. One scratches her cheek every time someone enters a room. One prays with her hands hidden under the blanket. One sleeps facing the door, always. You wonder what your own pattern looks like to those watching. Are you the compliant one? The sad one? The one who might be saved? Outside, the rain begins again. Not hard, just steady, like the heartbeat of the building itself. And you, curled on a narrow mattress, listen. Not for the storm, but for something smaller. The sound of your own name, maybe. Or a knock that never comes. Or just a voice. Any voice that says, I see you. They come and go, the other women. Some are younger than you, with pale wrists and eyes that never settle. Some are older, their hair already silvering, their hands marked by decades of kitchen knives and childbearing. And some seem to exist outside of age, faces neither young nor old, just worn in a way that suggests they've been forgotten longer than they've been remembered. You don't always learn their names. Sometimes it's safer not to. The woman across the hall from you is called Alice. She came in last winter, they say, after wandering through town in her nightgown, barefoot in the snow. She never explained why. The papers said, nervous collapse. Her family said, she changed after the baby. The staff said, classic case. Alice hums at night. Not songs exactly, just sounds, fragments, a tune that hovers on the edge of recognition. She taps her fingers on the bedpost in rhythm. Some nights it's comforting. Other nights, it feels like she's knocking at something only she can see. She once told you she used to paint. Not landscapes or portraits, but walls. I painted the nursery blue even though I knew it was a girl, she whispered. Isn't that strange? You didn't think it was, but you didn't say so. The wrong opinion here could be dangerous. Then there's Margaret, 2 doors down. A widow, perhaps, or someone who simply stopped being anyone's responsibility. Her speech is slow, precise, like each word is a glass object she's afraid to drop. She used to teach Latin, you overheard. They say she argued with the vicar about scripture, publicly. That's what got her labelled. Too intellectual. Borderline delusional. She walks the courtyard alone, lips moving, eyes never still. You asked her once what she was thinking. She replied, "The Greeks had words for sorrow we've forgotten how to pronounce." Then she turned away. And then there's Clara. Clara is different. She arrived in spring, wearing a hat far too elegant for this place. Her gloves were white, her back straight. She walked in like a guest, not a prisoner. But by the end of her first week, the gloves were gone, the hat confiscated, and her posture had begun to fold inward like paper. Clara doesn't hide her anger. She looks the nurses in the eye. She asks questions, real ones. Why is the piano locked? Why does the tonic make us sleepy? Why are women punished for sadness? No one answers her, not directly. So they put her on bed rest. Not because she's ill, but because she's inconvenient. You hear her sometimes, speaking through the wall. Not loudly, but firmly. As if she's giving a lecture to herself, practicing for the day someone finally listens. You envy her, her refusal, her fire. You wonder how long it will last. Because that's what this place does. It doesn't just confine. It wears. It sands down the edges. First, it quiets your voice. Then it muffles your thoughts. Then slowly, it teaches you to ask less. Not because you're healed, but because it's easier to forget what you wanted. The women here are not mad. They are grieving. They are questioning. They are remembering too much. And in a world that prefers its women small, smooth, and still, those things are intolerable. In the sewing room one day, a girl, barely older than 15, begins to cry. Silently, but visibly. Her needle slips from her hand. Her shoulders tremble. The woman beside her reaches out, almost instinctively, to touch her arm. The nurse snaps. No contact. The older woman pulls back, ashamed. The girl keeps crying, now into her lap. Later, you find a note tucked beneath your pillow. It's from Clara. Just 5 words, scribbled in pencil. They only win if we forget. No signature, no explanation. But you know it's hers. You read it again that night, under the covers, heart pounding like you've stolen something sacred. And perhaps you have. A moment of defiance, a reminder that you are not alone. That behind every quiet face here, behind every yes nurse and bowed head, there is still someone inside. Someone with a story, a wound, a name. The girl who cried disappears a week later. No one explains. Her bed is stripped, her name removed from the chart. When you ask a nurse, she says, "Transferred," then walks away. Transferred where? To another ward? To another silence? To oblivion? You don't ask again. Instead, you look at the women around you. Really look. At their hands, calloused or delicate, always busy. At their eyes, darting or dull, always guarded. At their postures, bent, resigned, or like Clara's, defiantly upright. Each one has been labelled hysterical, melancholic, disobedient, troubled. But in truth, each one was simply too human for the world outside, and so the world put them here. Together, but isolated. Alive, but paused. Waiting perhaps not to be rescued, but to be remembered. The building is a body. You begin to understand this not as metaphor, but as lived fact. The hallways are veins, the rooms, lungs, the nurses, like white-blooded sentinels patrolling the tissue. You are a cell inside it, moved and managed, never truly free to drift. And like any body designed for control, this one was built with precision. Not for comfort, not for healing, but for surveillance, for suppression. The architecture tells its own story if you listen. The ceilings are high, not to give breath but to intimidate. The windows are narrow, placed too high to see anything but slivers of cloud and the occasional branch. A reminder, the world is still out there, but just beyond reach. The floors are stone, cold in winter, echoing in every season. They amplify footsteps, coughs, cries. There is no privacy here, no thought too soft to be overheard. Your room, like the others, is identical. A bed, a basin, a crucifix. The walls are close, but not tight, just wide enough to make solitude feel like abandonment, not intimacy. Some of the older patients say the building was once a convent. Others claim it was always an asylum. You don't know which is worse. One suggests penance, the other punishment. Neither promised understanding. At night, you listen to the groaning of the pipes, the slow creak of beams expanding and contracting with the weather. The building breathes with you, or over you. You're not sure anymore. The staircases are narrow and steep, built not for elegance, but efficiency. No handrails in certain places, just stone steps and silence. You hold the wall as you climb, always careful. A fall could mean weeks in the infirmary, or a change in your file. Loss of coordination, delusional episodes, suicidal ideation. The building doesn't protect you, it waits for you to fail. There are rooms you've never entered, doors locked at all hours. Rooms the nurses speak of only in glances. One is said to contain restraints, another the isolation ward. You don't know what's worse, being placed there, or never knowing if you will. The library is locked, of course. You pass it sometimes on the way to movement hour. Through the glass you see rows of books gathering dust, shelves sagging with the weight of words no one's allowed to read. It's not about knowledge, you realize. It's about control. A mind that wanders is a threat. And so the architecture contains not just your body, but your thoughts. The courtyard is the only open space, but even it is curated. A square of land surrounded by the same stone that surrounds your cell. No trees, no benches that face each other. The grass is allowed to grow, but not too high. Beauty is not encouraged, only management. You're told the design is for your safety, but safety here feels like a euphemism. What they really mean is compliance. The nurses' station is placed at the intersection of two main corridors. From there, they can see nearly every hallway. Glass windows, open doorways, no corners to hide in, no shadows that linger. Even the furniture speaks. Chairs too light to be used defensively, tables bolted to the floor, clocks everywhere, but none that tick aloud. Time here is not for measuring progress, it's for measuring behavior. You begin to move differently, over time, more carefully. You walk with soft steps, keep your arms close to your sides. You sit when expected, stand when asked. You have learned the angles of the building, where to pause, where to avoid. You know which tiles creak, which door frames are always damp, which windows let in just enough sun to feel like mercy. One day, during laundry duty, you discover a hidden mark on the wall behind a basin, a name scratched in with something sharp. Lena, 1874. The year is old. The mark is shallow. But the presence is loud. Lena, a woman who was here, who left something behind. You touch the letters and feel something electric, ancient. Not power, exactly. Not even hope, but history. The building is full of ghosts, not of death, but of erasure. Their presence lingers in the chipped paint, the worn stone, the scratches on the windowsills. They were here, these women, not just as patients, as people, as voices, as stories, but the building was designed to forget them. You won't. Later that week, you're assigned to clean the main hallway. A nurse gives you a bucket, a rag, and a warning. No dawdling. As you scrub the baseboards, you see more names, tiny carvings, nearly invisible. ARMM, 1882, a crude flower, a spiral. Someone has etched a line from a poem. No cage can hold what sings in silence. You memorize it before it's wiped away. Even here, in this architecture of obedience, someone once dared to be poetic. And that, you think, is a kind of rebellion. That night, as you lie in bed, you think of the walls, not as prison, but as palimpsest, a place written on, erased, written over again. Every crack a sentence, every beam a memory. The building may not remember you, but you remember it. You know its smells, its noises, its cruelty and its quiet kindnesses. The way light falls across the floor at noon, the exact sound of a tray dropped on tile, the way a door clicks just before it opens. And maybe, just maybe, that knowing is its own resistance, a soft, steady refusal to be erased, a way of saying, I was here, I am still here. The word treatment suggests intention, care, something done with hope. But here, inside these walls, treatment is something else entirely. It is a ritual, yes, but not one rooted in healing. It's about quieting, restraining, reformatting your very body to fit a mold it never agreed to inhabit. You are called for your first hydrotherapy session on a Monday morning. It's still dark outside. The nurse wakes you with a brusque gesture and a single command. Up. You dress quickly, as instructed. No time for questions. The hall outside your room smells sharper than usual. Chlorine, wet linen. You follow the nurse down 3 corridors and through a heavy door marked Therapeutic Wing. The word sounds important, as if whatever happens here is imbued with purpose. Inside, the room is colder than you expected. Tile from floor to ceiling, a long table, buckets, a row of tubs along the far wall, steam rising faintly from the water. You're told to undress. The nurse, her face unreadable, gestures toward a small folding screen. You undress behind it, your fingers stiff with anxiety. The gown you're given is damp before you even slip it on. The fabric clings to your skin. You're led to a table and told to lie down. And then the water begins, not warm, not freezing, just cold enough to make you tense, to make your shoulders rise and your breath catch. It comes from cloths, soaked and laid across your limbs, from buckets poured gently, too gently, across your scalp, from pads tied to your chest. The idea, you were once told, is that water soothes the nerves, that the shock resets something deep inside. But it feels less like healing and more like submission. You lie there for what feels like an hour. No talking, no explanation. Just the drip of water and the sound of your own pulse growing louder in your ears. Your mind tries to flee the moment. You think of the sea, not real, but remembered. A beach you once visited with your sister. Salt air, gulls overhead, a kite held by a laughing child. The warmth of sand on the soles of your feet. You try to stay there, but the cold drags you back. Afterward, you're wrapped in rough towels and left to sit. No one looks at you. The nurse marks something on a clipboard. Session complete. Next comes electrotherapy. Not everyone receives it. Only the resistant, the severely disordered, or sometimes the ones who ask too many questions. You're led to another room, smaller, quieter, the curtains drawn. There's a machine against the wall, brass with knobs and wires and a faint hum. It looks like something meant to revive a corpse or extinguish a soul. The doctor is present this time. He explains nothing, just checks the dials and murmurs to the nurse. You are seated, strapped gently into a chair. Your hands rest on the arms, your legs bound loosely. The nurse applies something cold to your temples. Electrodes. You want to ask what they expect to happen, but your tongue feels heavy, your mouth dry. When the current comes, it's not fire, it's pressure. A sudden tightening in your chest, your jaw. Your fingers curl involuntarily. Your body shakes, not violently, but certainly not by choice. It ends quickly. No one speaks. Your restraints are loosened. You're helped up. You are handed a sugar cube, as if it were a treat. You place it on your tongue. It tastes of cotton and something too sweet to be kind. Later, in your room, you sit for hours, staring at your hands. They look the same, but they don't feel like yours. The next morning, the tonic is thicker than usual. It smells of valerian root and something sour. You drink it anyway. What choice do you have? Other treatments come in waves. Isolation for hyperactivity. Laxatives for melancholic constipation. Dietary restriction for spiritual clarity. At one point, you're assigned a therapy involving a swing, a large one suspended from the ceiling of a high chamber. You are strapped in and swung slowly for nearly an hour. The doctor watches, noting your facial expressions. The nurse counts the swings aloud. 32, 33. You close your eyes and pretend you're in a garden. 67, 68. A swing your father built long ago, painted white, a breeze, the smell of cut grass. 89, 90. But here there is no breeze, only stillness interrupted by forced motion. When you are unstrapped, your knees tremble. The idea, they say, is to restore equilibrium to the nervous system. But inside, you feel less balanced than erased. One day, you witness something that stays with you longer than the treatments. A girl, no more than 16, is being restrained in the hallway. Not violently, almost tenderly, but her eyes are wide with terror. She repeats, over and over, "I'm not ill. I just didn't want to marry him." No one listens. The nurse tightens the strap. A doctor walks past, nods approvingly. A clipboard is updated. Later, the girl is gone. Her room cleaned out, her name removed. That night, you write her name on the inside of your sleeve, in ink, small, hidden. You whisper it like a prayer. You don't know if she will remember herself, but you will. Because the real treatment here isn't the water or the shocks or the pills. It's the forgetting, the slow, methodical unmaking of identity. And survival, in a place like this, is the quiet act of remembrance, of your own name, of your story, of the you that existed before the diagnoses, before the silence, before the cold. The doctors believe they are the architects of understanding. They walk the halls with the confidence of men who have never had to explain themselves. Their coats are pristine, their language, clinical, their theories, sharpened not by empathy, but by distance. To them, you are not a woman, not really. You are a puzzle, a malfunction, a body whose instincts have gone astray. They use words like imbalance, disturbance, regression. They draw diagrams on chalkboards, neat, abstract models of hysteria, melancholia, female madness, arrows pointing toward the womb, the brain, the spine. The body is mapped like foreign terrain, and every symptom is a landmark on the route to control. You are never in the room when these theories are discussed. You are the object, never the witness. Science here is a monologue, and the listener is always assumed to be obedient. You hear whispers of it in your daily rounds, phrases dropped in your chart. Elevated sensitivity, obsessive tendencies, mild erotomania. You see them scribbled quickly as the doctor peers at you, like one might examine a strange fish in a tank. No question about your story, only about your symptoms. If you laugh inappropriately, you're manic. If you weep silently, you're depressive. If you question your treatment, you're delusional. And if you say nothing at all, you're catatonic. There is no answer that leads to freedom. You once asked why your thoughts mattered more on paper than in speech. The nurse looked at you with a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe fear, and told you to stop asking questions that make the staff uncomfortable. So you stopped asking, out loud, but in your head, the questions multiply. Why does the science of the body ignore the soul? Why do men study female pain but never live inside it? Why is your grief categorized like a specimen instead of held like a child? You remember something from a book you read long ago, a line by a female writer who was herself confined for nervous exhaustion. She wrote, "They do not ask why the bird sings, only why it sings too much. That is what the science of the century has become, an endless pursuit of quietness, an obsession with neutralizing the noise of women's inner lives." Your own diagnosis was made in a single afternoon, after a short conversation, after a family member said you had become difficult. The doctor nodded, wrote in a thick ledger, and just like that, you were ill. No blood test, no injury, no wound, just words. And once written, they calcified. Your mother cried. Your sister held your hand, but neither could stop it. Because a diagnosis, once made by science, is like a key turned in a lock, no one questions its authority, especially not when the patient is female, especially not when the ailment is her mind. You meet other women who've received similar judgments. One was a midwife who lost 3 babies in a row. They said her grief became obsessive. Another was an opera singer whose voice frightened the neighbors. Another wrote letters to a lover who never replied. Each of them reduced to a paragraph in a doctor's journal. Each of them a case study for young men learning how to recognize female excess. The textbooks are full of them. Tales of women who saw angels, who refused to eat, who screamed at night. Their stories are printed in italics, their names shortened to initials, their voices gone. And yet, beneath every clinical note, there is something more. A pulse, a breath, a question unasked. Perhaps what science feared most was not madness, but honesty. The honesty of pain that had no clear cause, of suffering that came not from illness, but from living in a world that demands so much silence. The female body is not a mystery, you want to say. It is a memory. It remembers everything, every gaze, every touch, every time it was told to sit, to hush, to smile. And sometimes the body says enough in the only language it's been given, trembling, weeping, forgetting, refusing. But they don't read it that way. They read it as disorder, and so they prescribe solutions, electricity, ice, restraints, tonic, obedience. You begin to wonder if the treatment is meant to save you, or to protect them from you, from your truth, from your sorrow, from the parts of you that still resist being filed neatly away under someone else's diagnosis. One morning, during reflection hour, you sit by the window with a journal. It's not yours, just a few stolen pages from the library's waste bin, but it's enough. You write what you can, not in full sentences, not always in order, just fragments. A memory of your father's coat, a phrase from a dream, the way Clara clenched her jaw when a nurse passed, the smell of your sister's hair. You write until your hand aches, then you fold the page and hide it in your shoe, not because you think anyone will read it, but because the very act of remembering, of witnessing your own life, feels like defiance. And in this place, defiance is a kind of science too, the science of staying human, of refusing to be studied into silence, of saying, in your own quiet way, You may name me, but you do not know me. You begin to write letters, not because you believe they'll be sent. You already know better. But because the act of writing them feels like standing at the edge of a cliff and shouting your name into the wind. Perhaps someone will hear, perhaps no one will. Still, you shout. The first letter is to your sister. You write her name at the top, slowly, carefully, as if the ink might reach her heart if your hand moves gently enough. You tell her about the window in your room, how at a certain hour the light falls just so, and the dust glows like tiny stars. You tell her about Alice's humming, about the bird you saw in the courtyard, about the way the tonic tastes different when you're especially tired. You do not tell her about the shocks, or the straps, or the girl who disappeared after refusing to eat. Some truths still need time to ripen before they can be spoken aloud. The letter is long, pages upon pages, folded together with a tenderness you didn't know your hands still had. You place it in the box marked "Outgoing Mail" by the nurse's station. It disappears. The second letter is to no one in particular, just a voice cast into the dark. You write about a dream you had, one where you walked through a forest and the trees whispered your name in a language you almost remembered. In the dream, you were not afraid. You woke up crying, not from fear, but from the strange relief of being known. That letter, too, is taken. You never see envelopes, never stamps. Only the box, and the slow vanishing. Eventually, you understand. The mail is not mailed. It's read, filtered, discarded, or worse, used against you. Clara confirms this one morning as you sit folding linens side by side. "They read everything," she whispers. "Every word, every name." You pause, the sheet in your hands half folded. "They say it's for our safety," she adds. "But it's not. It's to keep us from remembering too much of who we are out there." You nod. And that night, you begin hiding the letters instead. Behind loose stones in the wall, beneath the mattress, inside the lining of your shoe. You write one every evening, a new thread in the quiet tapestry of your own persistence. Not all are hopeful. Some are angry, some are numb. Some begin with, "I don't know if I exist anymore." But the act is the point. Writing is remembering. Remembering is resisting. And even resistance, when done gently enough, can look like grace. One day, during breakfast, you see a woman across the room with ink on her fingers. A smudge, small but unmistakable. She catches your eye, looks away. You smile, just a little. It's enough. There are others you begin to suspect. Others who write in secret, who whisper names to themselves before bed, who hum not for comfort, but for memory. This place is full of the nearly erased. Women whose identities were deemed inconvenient, then rebranded as illness. But they haven't all disappeared. Not completely. You think of the letters as anchors, each one tethering you, however lightly, to the version of yourself that lived outside these walls. The one who laughed too loud at dinner, who stayed up reading novels by candlelight, who walked alone at dusk and felt no need to explain why. That self still exists, thin as a shadow, but stubborn. You write her too. "Dear me," you begin. "You are not broken. You are not too much. You are just too alive for a world that wants you quiet." It's your favorite letter. You read it again and again, memorizing every line. You never try to mail that one. You keep it folded beneath your pillow, a secret just for you. A reminder that while this place may take your voice, your name, your time, it cannot take your truth. Not if you hold it, not if you write it, not if you remember. Because in a world where your grief is labeled illness, your longing called disorder, your stories deemed delusion, the very act of telling your own story becomes radical. And as long as you are writing, you are not erased. As long as someone, somewhere, is remembering you, even if that someone is yourself, you are not lost. Silence in this place is not absence. It is a tool, a language, a sentence handed down without a courtroom. It begins as a condition of your confinement, a way to ensure order, to keep disturbances to a minimum. But over time, it becomes something deeper, something stitched into the lining of your day, a pressure beneath your skin. There are rules around speech here. You speak only when spoken to. You answer directly. You do not raise your voice. You do not ask questions during rounds. You do not interrupt. You do not contradict the staff. You learn this not from a handbook, but from watching. A girl named Sophie once asked a nurse why she couldn't have her Bible back. The nurse didn't respond. The next morning, Sophie's pillow was gone. They said she had tried to smother herself. You knew it wasn't true, but no one asked you. Another woman, Jeanette, laughed during prayers. Not a loud laugh. A startled, breathy sound, like she had remembered something funny. She was removed from chapel for a week. Too disruptive. No one has heard her laugh since. Eventually, you understand that speech is not only controlled here, it is categorized. Some words are permissible. Thank you, yes nurse, no doctor. Others are not. Why, how, when will I leave? Even tone is monitored. Sadness is acceptable if it's passive. Anger is not. Anger is hysteria. Anger is disorder. Anger means more treatment. And so you begin to practice stillness. You sit through meals without comment. You nod when your name is called. You answer questions with as few syllables as possible. It is not cowardice. It is survival. But there's another kind of silence too. One that belongs to you. The kind you create deliberately. The quiet you choose when the noise of the institution threatens to erase your inner world. You begin to cherish these small silences, moments when the halls are empty and the only sound is the ticking of a distant clock. The quiet between pages when you manage to sneak a piece of writing past the staff. The hush of evening, just before lights out, when the world softens and breath slows and the mind drifts gently inward. You find power there. The silence they impose is a cage. The silence you claim is a refuge. One afternoon, during embroidery hour, a woman beside you drops her needle. It clinks against the floor. No one moves. The nurse does not react. Slowly, the woman leans down, retrieves it, and says nothing, but her hands are shaking. Later, you find her in the courtyard. You sit beside her on a bench that's always too cold. Neither of you speaks. Birds chirp in the distance. A breeze stirs the hem of your gown. The sun filters through a grey sky like diluted gold. She says finally, "They don't want us to talk because we might remember who we were." You nod. You say, "I write letters I never send." She looks at you. Then, with a voice so soft it might dissolve, she says, "I remember music." She doesn't explain. You don't ask her to. That's how it is here. Words are precious, spent sparingly. But sometimes they slip through the cracks, and when they do, they are luminous. That night, you dream of a room filled with light. No beds, no nurses, just women speaking freely. One tells her story in French, another in laughter, another through song. One paints, one dances. One reads poetry aloud, and no one tells her to be quiet. You wake up crying. The pillow is damp. You don't tell anyone. But the next day, in your journal, you write, "My voice still lives somewhere, even if I only hear it when I sleep." There's a woman who has not spoken in 5 years. Her name is Ruth. They say she came after her child died, that she screamed for 3 days, then said nothing for 3,000. You pass her in the hall sometimes. Her eyes are wide, alert. Not vacant, like they claim. She's listening. To everything. One evening, after prayers, she slips you a folded piece of paper. No words. Just a single line drawn in charcoal. A spiral leading inward, like the shell of a snail. You don't ask what it means. You carry it with you for weeks, folded beneath your sleeve. Because even silence has syntax. Even silence, when it's shared, is a story. And maybe the deepest resistance of all, in a place built to flatten, to muffle, to overwrite, is to listen closely, to the pauses, to the breath between words, to the sound of your own quiet truth, still alive, still waiting. They called them fits, episodes, attacks, expressions of a broken mind. But you've seen them up close now. You've heard the low moans in the night, the sudden wails behind closed doors, the shattering of ceramic bowls, the way a woman's fingers claw at her own chest like she's trying to dig something out. Not madness, but memory. And you know. These aren't fits. They're storms. The kind that rise slowly, almost invisibly, then break with such force they drown everything nearby. You've had your own, haven't you? Maybe not loud, maybe not violent, but moments when your heart sprinted inside your ribs, when your breath caught like a hiccup in your throat, when your hands went numb and you weren't sure if you were crying or simply leaking. The staff call it hysteria. The doctors say acute reaction. The ledger reads, nervous disturbance observed at 3:10 p.m. Patient instructed to rest. But you remember it differently. You remember folding laundry in the east corridor when the smell of starch suddenly made you think of your grandmother's house. You remember the sound of a spoon scraping a bowl and how it pulled you into the memory of someone feeding you broth during a fever. You remember your mother's voice, faint and firm. You must be strong now. And then you were gone. Not fainted, not unconscious, just not here. Some part of you, the thinking, managing, smiling part, had stepped away. In its place, a different you emerged. One that could not hold the edges together. One that simply spilled. There is a girl named Louise who sobs whenever she's touched, even gently. They say it's a reaction to treatment. But when you spoke with her, she whispered, "I was locked in a pantry for 3 days, when I was small." You understood instantly. There is no box on the medical forms for this kind of wound. No line item for what happened before they brought her here. But it's always there. In the shaking hands, in the flinch, in the eyes that do not trust light. The doctors, of course, don't ask about the past. They ask about symptoms, sleep patterns, food intake, thoughts of harm. They do not ask, who hurt you? They do not ask, what dream was taken from you? They do not ask, what was too heavy to carry alone? So the answers appear without questions, in outbursts, in muteness, in ritual. One woman folds paper into tiny shapes and hides them in her gown. Another taps the wall 5 times before entering her room. Another speaks in rhymes, even when asking for water. Coping mechanisms, they say. Signs of disorder. But you see them differently now. You see them as language, untranslatable, but not meaningless. You've begun to notice it in yourself too, a tendency to count your steps, a need to smooth your blanket just so. The way your eyes search for light at every meal, as if trying to find proof that time is passing, that you're still in motion somehow. There is a girl named Ellen. She screamed for 6 hours last Thursday, screamed until her throat gave out, until her eyes swelled shut. She had been here only a month. No one knew what triggered it. She never said. But that night, as they carried her to the isolation room, her fingers clutched at the doorframe, not to escape, but to mark it, to leave behind some evidence that she had passed through. You saw it later, the faint smear of blood on the wood. You reached out and touched it, still warm, still human, still unsilenced. You think often about what the world would look like if people asked different questions, if grief weren't pathologized, if anger were allowed, if a woman could shout and not be punished, weep and not be corrected, laugh wildly and not be restrained. If someone, anyone, had once placed a hand on your back and asked gently, "What are you carrying that no one can see?" You imagine it sometimes, a room, not white and sterile, but warm, filled with cushions, with blankets, with time, no clipboards, no straps, just people sitting, saying whatever needs saying, and others listening. That's all. No cure. Just listening. You think the world would be different, maybe even bearable. You don't scream. You never have. But sometimes you write your screams on paper, in long looping sentences that spin and spiral until they tangle in on themselves. You write them under your breath, in invisible ink, with a pen that doesn't work. You write them on your skin with your fingernail. You write them in your mind at night, composing letters to no one. And somehow, the storm passes. Not because it's gone, but because it has a shape now, a space, a sentence, a name. And that is what they never understood. That naming pain isn't madness, it's healing. Even if the name must be whispered. Even if no one believes you. Even if you're the only one who ever hears it echo back. Once every 2 weeks, they allow visitors. Not many. Not all patients. Only those considered stable. The ones who've smiled enough during meals, walked politely during group therapy, kept their hands still and their voice low. You are called to the parlour on a Thursday. The nurse says nothing, just that someone has come. Your stomach tightens. It's a sensation you've nearly forgotten. Anticipation. Hope braided tightly with dread. You don't know who it will be. You think of your sister first. Her braid, her green shawl, the way she used to tug at her sleeves when nervous. You think of her laugh. You think of the smell of her tea, spiced and always a bit too strong. Or maybe it's your mother, though you doubt it. The last time she saw you, her face was a portrait of confusion and shame. She whispered to the doctor that she hadn't raised you to be so strange, that she feared the neighbours would start to talk. Still, she might have come. You walk through 3 corridors, past the nurse's station, into the small visitation room. A fire crackles in the hearth, decorative, not warm. The curtains are too thick for real light. A single oil lamp casts everything in amber. You pause in the doorway. It is neither your sister nor your mother. It is your cousin Edward. He stands when he sees you, awkwardly, holding his hat with both hands like it might fly away. His moustache has thickened. His coat is fine. He does not meet your eyes at first. You sit across from him. There is a table between you, not large, but wide enough to remind you of the distance that has grown in your absence. He says your name like a question. You nod. He asks how you are, whether they're treating you well, whether you're eating enough. You answer all his questions politely. Carefully. He comments on the weather, on his new job. He says your aunt sends her regards. He doesn't ask why you're here. Not really. He doesn't ask what it feels like, or whether you still wake up unsure where you are. There's a kind of shame hovering around his mouth, like a taste he can't quite swallow. Finally, he says, "We didn't know what else to do." You look at him, and for a moment, you feel that old life flutter at the edges of your memory. The garden parties, the summer trips to the coast, the way he used to read poetry aloud when he thought no one was listening. You want to ask him if he remembers. Instead, you say, "It's quiet here." He nods, looks at his hands, says, "You look well." You don't, of course. You're pale. Your dress hangs awkwardly. Your fingers twitch from the tonic, but you nod anyway. He reaches into his coat and pulls out something small, wrapped in brown paper. He slides it across the table. "I thought you might like this," he says. You unwrap it slowly. It's a book, worn. A second-hand copy of Jane Eyre. The corners bent, the pages yellowed. You run your fingers over the cover. It feels like a miracle, something real. something remembered, something chosen. You say thank you. He says he has to go soon, that he only had a short window. You nod again. When the nurse reappears, Edward stands. He hesitates. Then, surprisingly, he leans in and kisses your temple, light, hesitant, and says, "Write, if you can." You whisper, "They don't send them." He pauses. Something breaks in his face. Then he says, "Write anyway," and leaves. You are walked back to your room. No one says a word about the book. You clutch it like a secret. That night you open it slowly. Inside, on the front page, he's written a single sentence. You are not forgotten. You read those words a dozen times. You sleep with the book beneath your pillow. And though you wake twice in the night, once from a noise, once from a dream you cannot hold on to, there is something new in your chest. Not quite hope, but warmth, like a window cracked open in a house that's been closed too long. You begin writing again the next morning. A new letter, this time to yourself. You write, "Someone came. Someone looked at me and did not flinch. Someone gave me back my name." And perhaps that, you think, is the quiet miracle of a visit. Not that it changes the world, but that, for a few moments, it reminds you there is one. Some women try to leave. Not many, not often, but enough that the staff keeps extra locks on the courtyard gates and an eye on anyone who lingers too long near the back stairwell. You've never seen anyone succeed. You've only seen what comes after. There was Mary, who ran one rainy afternoon during sewing hour. The nurses discovered her absence within 10 minutes, and by 15, she had been dragged back, drenched, breathless, eyes wide like a hunted animal. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, her shoes gone. No one knew how far she got. The punishment was swift. A week in isolation. They called it a rest cure. You heard her crying through the walls the second night. You whispered her name, softly, not to wake anyone, just to remind yourself that she still existed. Mary hasn't spoken since. There's a woman named Agatha who believes she can leave without moving. She closes her eyes and vanishes, not in body but in mind. Her face slackens, her breathing slows. She doesn't answer when called. She retreats into a world of her own making. The doctors call it catatonia. But one evening, during the brief gap between supper and prayers, you sat beside her and asked, "Where do you go when you disappear?" She didn't open her eyes, but she smiled and whispered, "Home." You understood. Then there are the women who escape inward. They create entire lives behind their eyes. One talks to her imaginary daughter, brushing her fingers through the air like she's combing curls. Another recites wedding vows to a husband who never arrived. Another, in the laundry room, sings lullabies to the steam rising from the basins. The staff call it delusion. You call it survival. You've thought about escaping, not in the literal sense. You're too watched for that, too wise. But you've imagined it. At night, before the tonic dulls your thoughts, you trace the shape of your old neighborhood in your mind. The shops, the street lamp at the corner, the crack in the pavement you once tripped on. You remember the sounds, a horse's hooves, the clatter of porcelain, your sister's voice calling your name. You think, if I can remember it all in order, I am not lost. Sometimes, you dream of running, not from fear, from longing. In the dream, you climb over a wall, not high. Just enough to separate one world from another. On the other side, there is no applause, no rescue, just the wind, a path, and your own footsteps, steady and alone. You wake from those dreams aching, but also breathing differently, like something inside you remembered its rhythm. One morning, you hear whispers in the hallway. A girl tried to slip out with the visiting laundry vendor, hid in the back of the cart, beneath blankets, and lie. She made it to the edge of the property. The dogs found her. She was returned with bruises on her legs and straw in her hair. She was unconscious. They said it was exhaustion, or hysteria, or both. You hear nothing more. But that night, Clara speaks for the first time in days. She almost made it, she says, voice low. I saw her through the window. She ran like she'd never learned to be afraid. You close your eyes and imagine it, not the failure, but the run, the moment her feet touched grass, the rush of wind, the heartbeat louder than rules, the flash of sky. You hold on to that image because even the attempt, even the breathless, brief act of running, is a story worth remembering, a sacred disobedience. You write her name down in your journal, not because she will read it, but because someone should. You write, she was not mad, she was trying to go home. And that, perhaps, is the quiet truth behind every escape. Not a rejection of this place, but a return to yourself. Faith lives here too. Not loudly, not like a hymn echoed through marble chapels, not like revival tents or declarations shouted from pulpits, but in soft, fractured moments, remnants of belief tucked into pockets, whispered beneath breath, clutched tightly when everything else slips away. There is a chapel on the south end of the asylum, small, stone-built, with stained glass that filters the morning light into tired colours. The pews creak. The crucifix is wooden, unvarnished. The candles are never lit unless there's a visitor. Most of the time the chapel is cold, but some go anyway, not because they believe they will be saved, but because the silence there feels less sharp than the silence in their rooms. You go sometimes during the hour after breakfast when the nurses are changing shifts. You sit in the third pew from the front, always the same one, and stare at the glass. The light falls across the floor like memory. Sometimes you whisper names, not prayers. Just names. Yours. Your sister's. The girl who disappeared. The one who tried to run. You say them aloud, like an incantation against forgetting. The staff thinks chapel is good for the soul. They assume everyone who comes is seeking redemption. But most of the women here are not praying for forgiveness. They're praying for remembrance. For someone, somewhere, to recall who they were before the diagnosis swallowed their identity. A woman named Eliza brings flowers to the altar every Wednesday. Wild ones, plucked from the edge of the property during her hour of yard work. She doesn't speak during chapel. She doesn't kneel. She just places the flowers and sits. One day you ask her why. She shrugs and says, I had a daughter. She liked yellow. That's all. But the next Wednesday, she brings dandelions. And you understand. The nurses sometimes hold services, readings from Psalms, a soft-voiced recitation about peace and stillness. They always choose passages about obedience, about God's plan, about the virtues of suffering. No one speaks during these services. Eyes are downcast, hands folded, but you can feel the resistance humming beneath the wood and stone. Because here, suffering isn't a metaphor. It's the daily ritual. And the women know the difference between endurance and abandonment. You once heard a woman recite the Beatitudes backwards, not out of blasphemy, just to see if it felt different that way. As if the blessing might reach her sooner if she reversed the path. Another time, a girl sang a lullaby in Latin, not because she knew the words, she didn't, but because she had overheard a nurse mention that Latin was the language of saints. She thought perhaps her voice would be taken more seriously that way. It wasn't, but she kept singing. You carry a scrap of scripture in your dress, not torn from a Bible, but copied by hand. It reads, I have called you by name, you are mine. You don't know why that line stuck with you. Maybe because in this place, names are fragile things, replaced with numbers, with diagnoses, with clinical shorthand. That verse feels like a tether, like someone might still see you as a person. And yet, faith here is also dangerous. Too much devotion, and you're delusional. Too little, and you're hollow. A woman who claimed to speak with angels was sedated for 3 days. Another, who refused communion because she felt unworthy, was marked as depressive and resistant. Belief, like everything else here, must be moderated, contained, filed. But the soul does not live in charts. It flickers, beneath skin, behind eyes, in the way you whisper a name to yourself as you fall asleep, or in the way you trace a cross on your palm with your thumb, not out of ritual, but out of longing. One night, during a thunderstorm, you find yourself in the chapel again. No service. No nurse. Just rain against glass and the faint creak of the building shifting. You kneel. Not because you believe everything will be fixed, but because your knees remember the posture of hope. And in that moment, you speak not to a God of doctrine or punishment, but to someone older, quieter, someone who might hold sorrow without diagnosing it, who might see your shaking hands and simply offer stillness. You say, I don't need to be saved, just seen. The silence that follows is not empty. It holds. You stay there until the candles gutter with the wind and your spine aches from stillness. And when you rise, something stays behind. Or maybe something follows you out. Not salvation, but presence. And in this place, that is holy enough. There is a small shelf in the storage room, a forgotten corner behind linens and cleaning supplies where someone long ago left behind a few books. They're worn, water-stained, the kind with pages soft from touch, spines cracked and stubborn. No one mentions them, no one guards them, which means, unofficially, they're allowed, as long as they don't cause trouble. You find it by accident. During cleaning duty, dusting the baseboards with a damp cloth, your hand brushes a loose panel. It shifts. Behind it, treasure. A copy of Wuthering Heights, half a volume of poetry by someone named Houseman, and a collection of fables, their cover torn. They don't seem like much, until you begin to read. And then, it's everything. Not just story. Not escape, but oxygen. You read in snatches, between tasks, during supervised rest hours, in the bathroom, when no one's listening. You hold each page like it might crumble. You read slowly, not out of lack of time, but reverence. The words open something in you. They name what's been left unnamed. Desire, loneliness, anger, wonder. The ache of being too full of thought in a world that asks for none. The poetry is your favorite. Simple lines, soft rhythms. They echo in your chest long after the words fade. And I am 2 and 20, and oh, 'tis true, 'tis true. You don't fully understand it, but you feel it. Deep and low, like a bell rung at dusk. Clara finds you reading one day. She doesn't scold. She just leans in and says, I thought I was the only one who knew. You look up. You've read them too. She nods. All of them. Twice. Maybe more. You smile. Later that night, she leaves a note under your pillow. Just a quote. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. You know it by heart. From then on, you begin sharing passages, not aloud, but secretly. Folded slips of paper exchanged during embroidery hour, lines memorized, then whispered to each other during walks in the courtyard. A secret library passed by hand. You watch others join. A girl named Ruth copies poems into her sewing kit. Another, Eleanor, hides verses behind the wallpaper by her bed. Even the quiet ones begin to hum. Not hymns, but meter, rhythm, words in motion. The staff start to notice, not the books, but the brightness, a certain lilt in voices, the way patients begin lingering near the storage room. One day, the shelf is gone. You arrive to find it bare. The books vanished, the wall smooth, like it had never existed. Clara looks at you, fury bright behind her calm. They're afraid, she says, not of madness, of imagination. You nod, you understand. Because here, imagination is rebellion. To dream is to remember you have a mind. To read is to remember you have a self. The next day, you begin writing the poems from memory, in the margins of your chart, on scraps of fabric, on the inside of your skin, where no one can touch them. One stanza becomes your prayer. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. You whisper it each night, not in despair, but in defiance. Because even without books, the stories remain inside you. Inside Clara, inside Ruth and Eleanor, and the woman who hums verses in her sleep. You pass them along in coughs, in glances, in the rhythm of your steps. You cannot silence a mind once it has known language. You cannot cage a woman who has learned to name herself in metaphor, and so you walk the halls with poetry in your blood. You sweep floors with sonnets behind your eyes. You nod politely while translating the silence into verse. They took the books, but not the words. They took the pages, but not the pulse. And in that, you remain untamed. A story that refuses to end. Time becomes liquid. You notice it first in your body, the way your shoulders no longer tense when the bells ring, the way you no longer count the spoonfuls during breakfast. You move without urgency, not from peace, but from drift, a kind of floating. You stop asking what day it is. You stop marking the seasons. The calendar above the nurse's station is never accurate. The month may be July, but the air feels like late March, damp, cool, metallic, a climate that lives inside stone. One morning, you wake with the firm belief it's Sunday. You dress, waiting for the chapel bell, but it never rings. You ask a nurse, and she says, "It's Thursday." You nod, but something inside you twists. Not fear, just dislocation, something unmoored. The women around you seem to feel it too. Clara once said, "I've been here 3 years, or 5. I'm not sure. Does it matter?" And you knew what she meant, because here, time isn't kept, it's endured. You begin to mark it differently, in stitches, in the length of your hair, in the way your nightgown frays just slightly more at the hem, in the stories that circulate, growing softer around the edges, like stones in a stream. There's the story of the girl who walked backward for an entire week, claiming it would undo her diagnosis. There's the one about the woman who wrote a letter to God and left it in the garden, only to find it gone the next day. There's the story of the nurse who once brought in lilacs from her own garden, just for the scent, and was reprimanded for disrupting the therapeutic balance. These are your new clocks. Not hours or dates, but moments. Emotional time, body time, story time. And within that, there's another kind of rhythm, a private one. Your dreams, for instance, begin to change. They are longer now, less jagged. You find yourself walking down corridors that do not exist, toward doors that open into memories you didn't know you kept. A beach, a library, a window filled with yellow light. In one dream, your sister is there. She doesn't speak. She just sits beside you on a step, braiding your hair. Her hands are warm. The braid is loose, imperfect. You wake with the phantom weight of her touch still on your shoulder. It takes you hours to shake it off. But you don't want to. There is something sacred about remembering, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. You begin to notice the others have their own rituals. Margaret counts her footsteps every day, to the dining hall and back, to the bathroom and back, always 64. Eleanor hums a single note before every meal, just once, like a tuning fork for her spirit. Clara has begun tying a thread around her finger each morning, red, thin, delicate. She says it reminds her there is still a pulse beneath the skin. One day, you find a small box in the courtyard, half buried near the fence. Inside, buttons. Dozens of them, all shapes and colours. Some sewn to scraps of fabric. Some polished clean. A secret collection. You don't know whose it is. You don't take any. You just close the box and bury it again, gently, as if preserving a time capsule for a world that might one day care. You begin to keep your own, not in a box, but in your mind. A mental shelf of memories, each labelled by feeling, not by date. The laugh you shared with Clara after someone slipped during movement therapy. The smell of toast on the rare morning it was burned. The day it snowed, not heavy, just a brief flurry, and you all ran to the windows like children. Moments, not linear, but real. The staff still measure your progress in weeks, in charts, in phases, but you've learned not to measure at all. You live inside the slow. You find peace in repetition. You discover that not every moment must be understood to be survived. Some only need to be witnessed. There's a girl who arrived last week. You haven't spoken yet, but yesterday you caught her staring at the ceiling during rest hour, whispering something you couldn't hear. You recognized the expression on her face. It was the look of someone trying to hold on to time, not as a schedule, but as a self. And you thought, yes, I know. Because even here, where the days blur and the weeks bend and the months vanish, you are still moving, still becoming, still alive. And in that, there is something timeless, something soft, something true. There is no ceremony for release, no trumpet, no notice, no gathering of nurses to offer a gentle goodbye. It happens quietly, like most things here, with a file update and a set of instructions that reach you only after decisions have been made behind closed doors. The question is not if someone will leave, it's how and who decides. It begins with a rumor. A nurse whispers something to another. A woman smiles more than usual during tea. There's a soft tension in the air. A shift, as if the walls themselves have begun to lean in. She's being discharged, someone says. The word lands heavy, not joyful, not sad, just strange. Because here, leaving is not just an ending, it's a riddle. You remember the first time it happened. Martha, a woman who used to sew flowers into her skirt hem. She was kind, quiet, her hands always moving, her eyes always distant. One morning, she didn't appear for breakfast. Her bed was made, her things gone. No one spoke of it. When you asked, the nurse said, "She's been released to family." You waited for a letter. It never came. Clara told you once, release is not freedom, it's permission. And you've seen it. The way some women leave with their shoulders hunched, as if already bracing for the weight of expectation. Because to be released, one must first be deemed better. But what does that mean? Quieter, more compliant, less alive. A doctor once told you improvement was measured by behavioral adjustment. You nodded, then asked, "What if I've adjusted to survive, not because I'm well?" He didn't answer, just wrote something in your file. You learned not to ask again. Now, as word spreads of another discharge, the ward softens. The woman's name is Edith. She's older, her children grown, her diagnosis vague. Melancholic episodes, complicated grief. She's been here for nearly a decade. Today, she wears her nicest dress. It doesn't fit quite right anymore, but she smooths it with practiced hands, buttons it all the way up. Her hair is pinned, her shoes polished. She sits in the waiting room, clutching a handbag she hasn't used in years. No one says goodbye. You think about going to her, saying something kind, but you stop, not out of fear, but because you realize she's already left in her mind. Her eyes are fixed on the door, not out of hope, but out of effort. And when her escort arrives, she rises slowly. No tears, no smile, just motion. The door opens. She steps through, and then she is gone. You don't speak for the rest of the day, not because you are sad, but because you are thinking. About what it means to leave a place that has made your silence a language, your stillness, a virtue, your resignation, a cure. Would you know how to move in the world again? Would you know how to speak without being monitored? How to cry without being observed? how to live without needing permission. At dinner, you ask Clara if she ever wants to leave. She shrugs, then says, "Not like that." You understand. Leaving is not the same as being free. You think about the version of yourself who entered this place, wide-eyed, frightened, questioning. You think about how she was pulled into rooms she didn't understand, given labels she didn't choose, offered treatments she couldn't refuse. Is she the one who would leave now? Or have you changed? Not cured, but reshaped. Not healed, but rewritten. If they called your name tomorrow, would you go? You imagine it, standing in front of the mirror, hands trembling, hair pinned, shoes tied. Walking to the door, heart pounding, stepping into air that smells different, too open, too sharp. The wind might touch you like an old friend, or a stranger. And in that moment, you realize, it's not fear of the world that holds you here. It's the knowledge that the world hasn't changed. It still punishes women who speak, who weep, who dream, who say no. And perhaps that is the cruelest truth, that even outside these walls, silence is still demanded, only without the honesty of bars. Still, you tuck that thought away, not as despair, but as a seed. Because someday you may hear your name called, and when you do, you want to walk not as someone cured, but as someone conscious, someone who remembers, someone who knows that leaving doesn't mean forgetting. And survival is not the same as surrender. They say hysteria no longer exists. The word, at least, has been retired, filed away in the Museum of Obsolete Diagnoses, alongside phrenology and humours and the wandering womb. Modern textbooks rarely use it. Doctors now speak of anxiety disorders, trauma, psychosomatic responses. They speak with cleaner terms, more data, fewer sighs. But the echoes remain. In the way a woman's pain is still doubted, in how her tone is judged before her words, in how grief, if it lingers too long, is quietly pathologized, in the way overreacting becomes a warning, and too emotional still curls itself around female throats like a silken noose. The past does not vanish. It lingers. Subtly, systematically, in hospitals, in classrooms, in bedrooms, in courtrooms. You begin to see it, not from history books, but from fragments, patterns, questions that answer themselves. Like, why were so many women institutionalized for what men wrote novels about? Like, what happened to the children of those hysterical women? Like, how many stories were scrubbed clean by the word madness? You read an article once. Someone had slipped it under your pillow, copied in pencil from a tattered newspaper. It said that hysteria had been replaced with conversion disorder. Same symptoms, same dismissals, new name. It made you wonder, was the goal ever to understand, or simply to contain? The legacy of hysteria is not in the archives. It's in the faces of women who still hesitate before crying in public, in the clenched fists of girls afraid to raise their voice, in the way crazy still slips so easily from lips, not as a diagnosis, but as a dismissal. You remember something Clara said once. We weren't sick. We were just too loud for the room. You carry that sentence like a rosary. Because the truth is, what they feared was never your madness. It was your knowing, your clarity, your refusal to pretend, your insistence on feeling deeply in a world obsessed with detachment. And so they called you hysterical, because they didn't have a word for wounded, but aware, for sane in a world gone numb, for woman with too much memory. You think about all the women who came before you, the ones whose names you never learned, who scrubbed floors and wrote poems in margins and left marks on doorframes and whispered to themselves in languages that never reached a second ear. They were not anomalies. They were not weak. They were not broken. They were survivors of a world that demanded silence and called it serenity. You want to write their names somewhere, Carve them into stone, etch them into glass, sing them like a litany in the chapel of the unheard. But you don't know their names. So instead, you write what you can. The color of their hair, the shape of their hands, the sound of their laugh, the rare ones, like lightning through fog, the scent they left behind, the questions they never got to ask. You write them down, one by one, in your journal, and you call the list the inheritance of the unquiet, because that's what hysteria left you, not shame, not weakness, but inheritance, of courage, of empathy, of the sacred shaking insistence that your story matters. Even if no one listens, even if the letters are never sent, even if you tell it only to the night, one line at a time. You are not the first to feel this ache. You are not the first to be punished for it. And you will not be the last to rise from it, not as a symbol, but as a witness, to the women who were locked away for feeling, to the girls taught to call their strength disorder, to yourself, and all that still remains, even after the diagnosis fades. You begin to see your body differently, not as something defective or diseased, but as a witness, a historian, a sacred archive. It remembers the moments you forgot. It carries truths that language never reached. It flinches before your mind does. It aches not because it is weak, but because it has not been believed. There is strength in that, a kind of secret wisdom. You start to feel it most during the quietest hours. When the halls are dim, when the tonic has not yet numbed your mouth, when your limbs are yours again, even if briefly. You sit on the edge of the bed and breathe. You feel the scar near your ankle. You remember how it got there. A fall during a summer chase, the grass hot beneath your knees. You run your fingers across your forearm, where the skin is rough from winter. You feel the pulse in your throat. You are still here. You exist. And you are not a symbol, or a chart, or a cautionary tale. You are a person, a woman with a body that has held grief like water, that has hidden rage in its joints, that has stored joy in the hollow of the ribs. You were taught that your body betrayed you, that your womb could make you mad, that your nerves were too sensitive, your heart too fragile, your skin too porous. But now you understand. Your body was never broken. It was simply overwhelmed by a world too indifferent to hold it gently. You begin to move differently, not with pride, not yet, but with attention. You stretch when you rise. You walk barefoot when no one is watching. You press your palms against stone walls and let them cool your blood. You lie on the floor sometimes, arms wide, breathing in through your belly, out through your lips, like waves returning to themselves. Clara teaches you how to hum. Not a song, just a note. Held steady, low, like a thread pulled from the center of your chest. It calms the ribs, she says, and it does. One evening, a nurse remarks that your complexion looks healthier. You nod politely, but inside you smile. Because it isn't health exactly, it's presence. It's the sensation of inhabiting yourself without apology, of moving through the ward not as an inmate, but as a keeper of sacred terrain. You start noticing how the other women hold their bodies. Eleanor wraps her arms around her waist when she listens. Ruth clasps her hands behind her back like a dancer about to leap. Margaret folds her hands into prayer even when speaking of ordinary things. Each movement is a language, each gesture a survival. There is poetry in the way you all exist. One afternoon, the doctor asks you during your session, "Do you feel more like yourself these days?" And you want to answer, "I don't feel like myself. I feel like someone who has earned her body back. Someone who stopped apologizing for her shape, her tears, her longing." But you don't say that. You say, "Yes, I believe I'm improving." He nods, writes, satisfied. He doesn't know that your improvement is not for him, not for the chart, not for the discharge report. It is for the you who first arrived here, frightened, disoriented, unsure if she deserved to inhabit her own skin. And it's for the you who will one day walk out, not cured, but intact, not erased, but etched. You begin to write a new kind of letter, not to anyone, just a manifesto, a whisper, a vow. This body is not disorder. This body is not shame. This body is the altar where my memory sings. You tuck the letter into the lining of your dress, close to the ribs, close to the place where you hum. And that night, when the lights dim and the corridor stills, you lie on your bed, hands over your chest, and you whisper to yourself, I am still mine. Night again. It falls like it always does, not abruptly, but like a tide, rising slowly, submerging the edges of the day until even time seems to hold its breath. You are in bed. The room is dim, but not dark. A single lamp flickers beyond the glass window in the corridor. Its glow stretches long shadows across the floor, soft and wavering, like memories on water. You stare at the ceiling. There's a crack that curves like a river, faint, branching, following a path all its own. You trace it with your eyes, again and again, like a ritual. Each night, it's the same. Each night, it becomes a map of what was, of where you've been, of how far you've traveled without moving. You are not asleep, but you are not fully awake. Somewhere in the space between breath and dream, you begin to speak, not aloud, just within. You are not lost. You are not gone. You are not alone. You whisper these words like a litany, not for comfort, but for truth. Outside, a tree creaks in the wind. The sound is old, slow, honest. You close your eyes and imagine it. The bark, the roots deep in the ground, the branches reaching skyward. Even here, stone-walled and locked in, your mind still grows outward, still finds green. You think about the girl who tried to run, the woman who painted the nursery blue, the teacher of Latin, the one who wrote poetry in the dark. You think about Clara. She sleeps in the room next to yours now. You can hear her breathing through the wall. Steady, measured, real. She tied another red thread around her finger this morning. To remember I'm more than what they've written down, she said. You touched your chest. You understood. You both exist beyond the file, beyond the diagnosis, beyond the room. You hear a footstep in the hallway. A nurse, perhaps. But she doesn't stop at your door. She continues on. The sound fades. The building groans quietly, and then stillness. You breathe in, deeply, and you let yourself remember, not the institution, not the treatments, not the silence, but yourself. Before, the girl in the garden, the woman who wrote letters, the mind that noticed everything, the slant of the sun, the texture of linen, the way words could become bridges. You feel her return, not all at once, but gently, like a tide rising. You imagine standing up, barefoot, walking the corridor, placing your palm on each door as you pass, saying the names, even the ones you've forgotten, until the walls know you're still here. You imagine opening the windows, letting in wind, letting in stars. You imagine saying aloud, "We were never sick, just unheard." The thought stays with you, and in the quiet, you smile, not brightly, not triumphantly, but gently, as if offering the night a promise, that tomorrow you will wake again, that you will keep remembering, that you will keep humming, that you will continue to write, even if no one reads, that your story, this story, will not vanish into walls. You reach under your pillow and touch the folded page. The letter to yourself. The one that says, you are not too much. The one that says, you are exactly enough. The one that says, this is not the end. You hold it there, like a flame, like a vow. Outside, the wind moves through the trees. Inside, your breath slows. And in that space between memory and sleep, something sacred lingers. Not noise, not fear, just a truth that hums in your bones. You were always more than what they saw. You were always whole, and now at last you rest.